Imagine you were forced to push millstones through humid summers and wind-sheared winters, watching the river carry other people's grain and sons to safety while your own days stayed chained to the wheel. On the moonless night when the river fell just enough to expose the shoals, a signed bond surfaced in the wrong hands. He would turn a ledger and a sheriff's log into weapons, and when escape began across the ferry road, the dogs cut the trail with surprising speed. A decoy keyring bought only minutes. The mill's bell counted them down. How do you hide in a county that has your owner's son listed like a bale of corn? Before we dive in, subscribe if you value original investigations. New cases every week. On June 21, 2023, in a chilled reading room at the Georgia State Archives in Morrow, a graduate researcher opened a sheriff's docket labeled Baldwin County Levies, 1838 to 1840. A folded slip fell out, a bond note naming a river mill owner, a creditor, and an indenture of the owner's eldest boy. The paper smelled of iron gall and damp linen. Along one edge, flour dust had pressed into the fibers as if it had slept beneath a sack. A margin held a rough map of the Oconee River, 3 pinholes marking Hickory Shoals, ferry landing, and mill yard. The docket's ledger line, written in the same clerk's hand, summarized an auction of seized items that never occurred. Photographs taken that day show the bond's wax tag broken cleanly, as if lifted and replaced more than once. Those images foreshadow the night when documents, keys, and the river's fall line would be used like tools. The world of this case is Baldwin County, where the Oconee saws along rock at Hickory Shoals before easing south toward Milledgeville. The Hickory Shoals mill sits on the east bank, a timber frame over a low dam, a wheelhouse groaning with wet wood, and a tally bell hung from a peeled pine spar. Up the slope, the upper yard, where the owner's office, storehouse, and main house form a triangle around a packed earth square. A few steps beyond lies Quarters Row, 6 cabins facing the river with a shared wash line and a fig tree that fruits early in humid years. A path curves from the upper yard to the ferry landing, where a thick rope swings between pilings like a mussel. The county road, locals call it Sheriff Road, threads to the courthouse where bonds and levies sleep until storms or memory wake them. The system is flour and fear measured by the same bell. At first light, the pre-dawn bell rings once to pull bodies to their places. 24 enslaved people keep the mill running, 4 in the wheelhouse, 8 in the grinding loft, 6 in loading and sacks, 4 at the saw pit, and 2 at the main house for kitchen and child care. An overseer keeps a chalk tally board by the office door, ticking sacks and hours, while a decoy key ring rattles at his belt, though the real locks rarely change. 3 hounds, brown-backed, rib-lean, sleep under the porch until someone runs. At night, an oil lantern hangs in the office window facing Quarters Row. Its flame is said to mean watchfulness, but it really signals where the owner drinks. The storehouse lock is iron and old. Rain has softened its warding. The mill runs to a rhythm. Bell, roosters, water, wheel, bell again. Isaiah Gant was bought into the mill from a plantation downriver for his hands, not his back. He learned lock geometry by feeling the give in old iron and reading the lash of the water on the wheel. His competence is the quiet kind. He understands how force travels through wood, how a wedge near the hub moves a ton at the stone. His vulnerability shows when he lifts. An old shoulder injury from the saw pit leaves one arm weak in the cold. Isaiah's private ritual is a strip of river reed he knots and unknots in his pocket. 1 knot each time the bell rings. He unknots when he counts eddies at ferry landing after sundown. He keeps a slate chip tucked in his heel rag to mark things in dirt when words are dangerous. Abram Crowell, the owner of Hickory Shoals Mill, is a man who trusts ledgers more than conscience. His vice is gaming, dice and cards at the ferry landing tavern, where he floats credit on grain futures and people. His control comes from paper, bonds, notes, promissory scratches he waves under sheriffs. His weakness is the same paper. He signs when drunk, stamps wax without cooling it, leaves docket copies where flour can hide them. Ezekiel Dodd, a merchant creditor out of Milledgeville, supplies barrels and cloth on interest. He visits monthly with a brass dice cup tucked into his sample case, teaching the owner new games combining grain weights and chance. His method of control is debt compounding, prices revised with each late bell. His predictable weakness is vanity. He brags about his holdings at court days, listing property as if reciting psalms, and keeps a habit of pocketing courthouse scraps as trophies. Nathan Pike, the county sheriff, wears duty like a hat he can tilt. He logs levies with exact times and sends posse notices down Sheriff Road with clock terms like sun high and moon lean. His control is the kennel. He feeds the 3 hounds scraps at the main house to make them loyal to the porch. His weakness is procedure. If a seal looks right and a time matches a bell, he rarely questions the story. Silas Crowell, the owner's younger brother, keeps overseer hours without the title. He counts sacks with chalk, keeps the decoy keyring, and bosses on the strength of a fox-colored switch. His control is ubiquity. He is everywhere, nowhere, and often behind someone's shoulder. His weakness is pattern. He moves on habit, office, tally board, storehouse, fairy chit, and believes others do the same. Oh, the wound that hardens Isaiah begins with a rumor that becomes a sight. In late spring of 1839, Abram Crowell loses a dice game to Ezekiel Dodd at the tavern by Ferry Landing. Unable to cover what he has staked, barrels, boards, even a judgment lien, he produces a bond note indenturing his own son, Thomas Crowell, to Dodd for a term that would carry the boy past majority. Witnesses see the wax seal pressed with the mill's ring. The next pre-dawn, the sheriff's log records the paper's filing and a levy warning that never arrives. The boy disappears into Milledgeville hands. Isaiah watches flour caught in prints on the office table. Small fingers, then none. He knows what paper can do to flesh. He has watched brothers sold to settle men's drinking. He adds a knot to his reed strip and does not unknot it. The artifact that will matter is the ledger itself, with its salt barrel smell and grain tally columns. Isaiah also studies the decoy keyring at Silas's belt and the rusted lock on the storehouse door that Rain has taught to open with shim and twist. His chosen method is misdirection using silent tools. A filed scrap of saw blade for shims, a wedge that shifts the wheel's bite without a sound, and the ledger to write a fiction that can travel in daylight. We will see again the bond note with its broken wax, the sheriff's levy log with clock words, the decoy keyring that never truly opens anything, the rusted storehouse lock that yields to patience, a fairy chit torn from Silas's coat pocket, and a chalk tally miscount that turns a manhunt the wrong way. A dice cup will roll once more, not on a tavern table but on office planks to fix an alibi. The way the mill breathes teaches Isaiah what to move and when. On blue hour mornings, damp river air makes the wheelhouse groan, and Silas goes to warm the office stove, leaving the tally board and keys within reach. On noon glare days, Nathan Pike rides along Sheriff Road to check his mailbox at the mill for court notices, lingering for a sip at the well. On moonless nights, Abram drinks by the office window, lantern making his ledger a stage. Isaiah notes that the bell rings twice when Ezekiel visits, once at his arrival, once for accounting that looks like courtesy and smells like interest. By midsummer, 24 bodies have learned to float through work in a way that keeps wrists and ankles free at the right minutes. Elders trade trips to the fig tree, children chase fallen wheat letting feet learn the texture of the path. Isaiah carries the filed sawtooth wrapped in cloth under his heel rag and tests the storehouse lock when no one watches. Press, wag, breathe, twist. The old iron will open to quiet insistence. There is a night when Abram scratches his name into the bond for Thomas and blots it with the same hand used to weigh flour. He leaves a grease crescent on the margin. Ezekiel slips the paper into his case, but cannot resist showing it at court day, and a clerk copies a partial into the sheriff's log, where Nathan marks time against his own bell memory. Silas, counting sacks with chalk, forgets the count when Ezekiel rattles his dice cup in greeting and drops a fairy chit that lands like a ticket to elsewhere. The paper trail splits, one original, one copy, one rumor. Isaiah learns that stories can fork like the river. The plan, still unwritten, will need more eyes than Isaiah's. He tells no one with words. He places chalk signs low on quarters row at knee height, a half circle for wheelhouse, a tick for storehouse, 2 dots for upper yard. Elders notice. A woman who washes at Ferry Landing begins to shake out sheets at particular moments. A boy who tends hounds switches scraps from the main house to wheelhouse at sundown, teaching the dogs that the mill smells like food. A ferryman's child, hair bright as dandelion seed, starts leaving pebbles stacked by the ferry rope when the current runs softer, a signal subtle enough to pass for play. Some would say a man's vice is none of an enslaved worker's concern, but when vice writes itself onto a child's life like a brand, place becomes duty. Isaiah's motive is not rage for its own sake, but a tightening of cause and effect. A boy was turned into a line item. A ledger must be turned into a compass that points the wrong men the wrong way at the right hour. He knots the reed again. The county posts a notice, a church benefit at the Riverside Chapel 2 nights hence to raise funds for the poorhouse roof. The bell will ring thrice at sundown and again at pre-dawn for the kitchen women to set kettles. Nathan Pike intends to attend. His log notes say so. Ezekiel Dodd plans to collect a small interest payment afterwards at the mill office. His calendar scribble confirms it. Abram Crowell has promised flour for the tables and will be drunk by the second ring if history holds. The pre-dawn bell is fixed in place, the chapel bell set to speak in intervals. Isaiah counts knots on his reed, feels the wheels pulse under his boots, and listens for weather. The air is heavy, the wind shears and goes still. 2 nights out, with the river falling a hand's depth, the bells will tell the county where to look and when to turn their heads. The plan grows out of what Isaiah already knows. The mill moves because wood, iron, and water accept persuasion more than force. Misdirection begins where clocks and papers meet. The chapel benefit fixes bell times for the whole county. The sheriff's log will later fix words to those times. Isaiah needs each body to be where a ledger line will later say it stood while the work of leaving already starts. Weather and tide favor him. The afternoon before the benefit, the Oconee slips a hand's depth lower over Hickory Shoals, and the air sits too heavy for scent to travel clean. The wind shear that snapped at noon goes quiet by blue hour. In the wheelhouse, damp oak breathes under tar. The bell hangs ready to tell a story true enough to pass inspection. At pre-dawn, the chapel bell calls kettles. Elders walk toward the chapel with sacks of flour. The children chase across Quarters Row with tin cups to fetch morning water. Isaiah knots his reed strip to mark the first ring. He stoops at the step of cabin 3, where a man named Ruel lies with a setter's patience, shoulder wrapped after a saw bite. Isaiah slides the filed sawtooth from his heel rag and tucks it under the man's blanket edge with a tap that means storehouse later. No word passes. He moves along the row with a bundle of kindling that is not kindling at all, wedges cut from scrap pine that fit the wheel's hub spokes. He hides them under the wash trough by the fig tree. A woman shakes a sheet as if to test the damp. Her hands mark the moment. The mill keeps its face of habit. Consequence, the silent tools are staged close to where they will matter, no notice drawn. A boy who tends the hounds slips their first scraps under the wheelhouse sill instead of the main house porch, a change that writes new scent into the morning. By late morning, Ezekiel Dodd arrives with his brass dice cup bright from polishing. The upper yard gathers people indirectly. Flour barrels form a screen for eyes. Abram Crowell keeps his usual seat at the office ledger, lantern unlit in daylight. Silas rattles the decoy keyring to sound official. The noon glare presses everything flat. When Ezekiel and Abram count, Silas fetches the storehouse tally and leaves the office door thrown to catch air. Isaiah shoulders a sack through the doorway to stack by the table the way he has done 100 times. The ledger's ribbon marker sits between grain columns. The bond note copy from the sheriff's docket, the one Ezekiel likes to gloat over, rests loose under the ribbon like a pressed leaf. Isaiah does what mill hands do. He dusts. Flour from his palm falls on the page in a thin skin, while his other hand slides a duplicate he has prepared. Names and sums copied in charcoal to resemble clerk's hand, but with clock terms shifted. Sun high where sunfall had been, moon lean where pre-dawn belonged. The original slides beneath the ledger's backboard where the wood has sprung a hair from the spine. The copy lies where Ezekiel will touch it later and believe it his. The dice cup rattles. Silas blinks. Abram nods at figures, never feeling the spine lift and settle. Consequence, the paper that will later travel to the sheriff to validate a search now quietly misstates time. When the county reads the line, bell and log will agree in terms but not in hours. The ledger has been turned into a weapon with a soft breath of flour. Late day drifts toward blue hour. The chapel cooks lay stew in iron kettles. The pre-dawn bell still to come feels preordained. Silas checks the storehouse once more before stepping down to the benefit. He locks with ceremony, loud enough for the quarters to hear, then pockets the heavy iron key and rattles the decoy ring for show. From shadow, Ruel slips across the yard, shoulder stiff, blanket pinned into a crude sling. He kneels at the lock, the filed sawtooth braced on a sliver of barrel hoop as a handle. He has watched Isaiah's wrist movements enough to mimic. Press, wag, breathe, twist. The old ward yields like an old man waking. The lock turns without clang. Inside, harness knives and sacking needles sit in a tin tray. Fairy chits, scraps bearing Silas's initial, rest under a weight. Ruel takes 2 needles and 1 chit, then pulls the door to. He leaves the lock turned, but the tongue half set, ready to open again with a firm push from outside, a detail that will later look like force. Consequence: the store of small, silent tools leaks into hands that will carry them out under shirt seams. The missing fairy chit becomes a breadcrumb. As dusk slides in, Isaiah climbs to the wheelhouse under pretext of oiling pins. He palms 1 wedge from the wash trough and slides along the hub where spokes meet the drum. The wedge does not stop the wheel. It changes its bite by a whisper, adding a stutter to the rotation. Sacks on the grinding loft begin to creep back along the conveyor by inches instead of rests, the machine's rhythm changing enough to miscount without overt failure. Below, Silas's chalk tally starts to drift. He believes he has stacked 40 sacks. The chalk says 38. He marks a correction. Chalk dust settles like frost. Isaiah knots his reed strip once more. The night will make math lie further. Consequence: when Ezekiel returns after the chapel to settle interest, his count will not match what he believes he saw. Argument will write itself into the air. Nathan Pike, conditioned by procedure, will later log times against the wrong count. The chapel bell rings thrice at sundown. The county climbs the hill with stew bowls. Abram is pulled into congratulations and drink. Ezekiel pockets the ledger page he believes to be proof of punctuality. Silas cracks walnuts beneath the lantern at the office window, backlit like an emblem of watch. Down at ferry landing, the rope hums in the easy current. The ferryman has left the skiff tied broadside, confident night will keep it. The ferryman's child piles 4 pebbles by the post and then kicks 1 away, a signal that the shoals show themselves and that the far bank can be reached without deep water in the middle. Isaiah touches the pebbles and feels the gap like a breath. He moves 3 people first: Ruel, the woman with the sheets, and the boy who feeds hounds. Across the rope, hand over hand, bodies low, skiff drifting like a leaf at slack line. On the far bank, they flatten into cane and switchgrass, faces to the earth. Isaiah returns alone, hand skin burned glossy from rope. The moonless night cloaks movement, only water speaks. Consequence: a route exists that the county's eyes do not expect. The movement begins while the upper yard believes it watches. Misdirection invites response. It comes sooner than Isaiah wants. Before the chapel ends, Ezekiel and Abram return to the office to settle accounts. The ledger page with its shifted clock terms leads them into dispute. Flour dust blurs one margin where Ezekiel rubs in irritation. Numbers smear like fog. Silas steps to the porch, decoy keys jangling, and calls for the sheriff with the confidence of a man whose procedure has always been obeyed. Nathan Pike arrives at the upper yard with 2 of the 3 hounds. The third, already fed near the wheelhouse, lingers and whines. Nathan sees the chalk miscount, sees Ezekiel's page with sun high where it should say sunfall, and the combination scratches his mind like a burr. But a rule is a rule. He opens his log and writes that he is present at moon lean, a phrase that will later make a jury feel the county's grammar is in order. Then he snaps a finger to set the hounds on Sheriff Road toward Ferry Landing because men always run for boats. The dogs cut the trail with surprising speed. The boy who fed them at the wheelhouse has made the yard smell like supper. The hounds treat the main house porch as neutral and the wheelhouse as a kitchen. They swing wide, noses low, and land at the storehouse door where the lock tongue sits half set. A paw nudge pushes the door. It opens. This looks like flight. It also buys time. Nathan will search shelves before water. Consequence, the animals, carefully misled, both in danger and delay. They point at a door while the river quietly takes people away by rope. The decoy keyring has no bearing on the storehouse. Silas spends a precious minute rattling it against iron that is already untithed. Along this seam of minutes, small forensic breadcrumbs settle in place. On the office floor, Ezekiel's dice cup rolls from the desk in the shuffle and leaves a circular bruise in flour dust that later looks like a stamped seal. On the storehouse threshold, the rust from the lock's tongue falls in a crescent that can be read by any man who knows how iron flakes. In the yard, shoe prints of 3 sizes, man, woman, child, cross and blur near the fig tree, with a single needle glinting in dirt where it fell from a sleeve. At Ferry Landing, the pebbles stand like a short prayer, one kicked into the river's edge where it will catch in a reed and hold a line of silt. When Nathan turns the hounds toward water, Silas sprints ahead to the landing with the lantern, holding it high to watch ripples. The light makes a corridor. Isaiah, returning on the rope with the next pair, a woman with a baby bound to her chest and an old man with a sawyer's stoop, feels the light like heat on skin. He cannot drop. He cannot go forward without being seen. He chooses what silent tools permit. He lets go one hand and wraps a wedge from his sash around the rope to ride like a pulley. The skiff drifts into shadow. His body pivots under the line so that his back turns to the lantern, and his shirt, damp in the color of river, reads as water. Silas sweeps light across the surface twice and misses him. The angle and moonless night conspire with cloth and quiet metal. Isaiah slides to the far bank and presses flat. The woman feels the river in her knees and says nothing because no one says anything. The baby sleeps because the world has been walking all day. Consequence, adaptation costs skin and time but saves the crossing and preserves quiet. The wedge that altered the wheel now alters a body's path. Back in the upper yard, Silas discovers his coat pocket torn. The ferry chit is gone. He accuses air with his posture. The decoy key ring rattles faster, its lack of function laid bare by iron refusing to answer. Nathan marks another line in his log. Lantern sweep at ferry, no craft seen. Ezekiel pushes for a search of quarters row, and they enter cabin 3 first, because the storehouse lock suggested that hand. Inside, Ruel's sling still smells of pitch, and the filed sawtooth is absent. What remains is a chalk mark, 2 dots at knee height, that means upper yard to those who know Isaiah's code. To Nathan, it looks like a child's game. He scrapes it with a boot. Another minute falls away. Consequence, the search runs by habit and hunch rather than proof. The sheriff's log records order, the ground records improvisation. The ledger's earlier time shift is already exerting control over the investigator's choices. The last movement begins where it must, at the wheel. Isaiah knows that if the upper yard realizes the raft of bodies is lighter by more than a handful, they will ride out with long poles and sweep the shoals, catching whoever clings to cane. He needs the mill to claim attention and hold it. He climbs the wheelhouse a final time and pulls the second wedge from under the trough. One precise strike with the harness knife butt sets the wedge deeper into the hub, and the wheel's stutter becomes a drag. The grinding loft belts begin to squeal, sacks overturn, a small avalanche of grain sluices across planks and down the chute into the yard, pooling like pale water at Silas's boots. The bell rope jerks in sympathy and rings itself once, then twice, without a hand on it. The sound is a summons and a clock. Abram stumbles from the office toward the wheelhouse, hand on ledger, as if the book could soothe machinery. Ezekiel follows, spitting flour and words that will later be paraphrased as protest. Nathan calls the hounds back from water, because a machine this heavy, making a noise this wrong, suggests danger the county understands. The lantern at the office window swings and paints the tally board with a crescent of light, throwing the miscount into dramatic relief. On the far bank, Isaiah hears the second strike of the bell and makes the decision that closes all other doors. He signs to the cane and switchgrass, and bodies begin to crawl along the waterline toward Hickory Shoals, where exposed rock will take bare feet to a cut bank trail the ferryman showed him in winter. The river speaks around knees and elbows. The reed strip in Isaiah's pocket has no knots left to count. Consequence? By forcing the yard's eyes to turn and the hounds to heel, Isaiah trades secrecy for time. Once the wheel has been wounded in public, there is no repair that can be written into normalcy before morning. The ledger will be examined, the sheriff's log will be filled, men will ride Sheriff Road before dawn. But the bodies have committed to the far bank, and there's no safe return to routine. The mill's bell keeps ringing, counting not work, but the last minutes of the old order. By first light, the wheelhouse still complains with the drag Isaiah set the night before. Grain lies drifted across the upper yard like pale silt after flood. A crescent of rust under the storehouse latch has deepened where dew lifted flakes. Nathan Pike ties the 3 hounds to the tallyboard post and works the morning the way a clerk would, not a hunter. One space at a time, one object at a time, writing what each thing claims to show. He begins with the office because paper looks like control. The ledger rides open where it was left. Along one margin, a round bruise in flour dust reads as if some official seal had been pressed there. Only a few who saw Ezekiel Dodd's showy dice cup last night would recognize its rim. The page itself contradicts memory. It says, "Sun high," when everyone swears the count happened at sunfall. That is not a fugitive's lie. That is clerk work that has slipped its gear. In the storehouse, the lock tongue bears a new scuff, and the jamb shows a half-moon of iron rub where the door was closed against a misset latch. Inside, one tin tray shows a missing pair of sacking needles. A single needle lies in yard dirt near the fig tree, as bright as a dropped thought. On a shelf of sundries, fairy chits stay in a small stack, one short if you count slowly. Nathan counts slowly twice. At the ferry landing, the rope hums with an easy morning current. On the post at waterline, pebbles stand in a little column, but a gap separates the top 2. At the edge, a stone sits half sunk in a ruffle of mud. Far bank reeds show a long, low lay as if bodies slept there and rose before dawn. The skiff is still tied. The knot looks used and retied by the same hand. Back up the slope, shoe prints of 3 sizes travel between quarters row and the upper yard, and then smear into confusion where the bell rope threw its false summons. Nathan kneels to a child's print with a splayed toe at cabin 1, and then follows a man's narrower sole to cabin 3, where a faint chalk mark remains low on the doorframe. He had scraped one mark last night in irritation. Another, half hidden in smoke soot, still shows. 2 dots. It means nothing to him. It will never mean anything to his log, which prefers tidy nouns and verbs. The hounds do not bay at the river. They worry the air under the wheelhouse where scraps were fed yesterday. It is not that their noses are wrong. It is that the yard has been taught to smell like a kitchen where it should smell like iron. By late morning, Abram Crowell is sober enough to feel the weight of loss without understanding its method. He clutches the ledger as if it could restore grain to sacks by listing it again. Ezekiel Dodd is dry-mouthed and red-faced, embarrassed by a page that contradicts his own clock. Silas Crowell rattles the decoy keyring out of habit and discovers again that iron does not answer jingling. At midday, a ferryman's child passes the courthouse steps in Milledgeville with a wrapped parcel tied in flour-stiff cloth. The bundle is left at the clerk's table while the man's back is turned to hang a notice. Inside lies the original bond note, the one Abram signed in a tavern's heat, pressed with the mill's ring when the wax still ran. Its broken wax tag has been carefully folded into the packet, as if to confess that seals can be removed and remade. The margin shows grease crescent from a thumb. Along one edge, flour has embedded in the rag pulp. A stitched map scrap rides with it, pricking Hickory Shoals, ferry landing, and the mill yard with 3 pinholes. The clerk recognizes the horsehair paper and the hand. He copies its essentials and pins a notice of irregular indenture to the docket board. That document is not a manhunt. It is the beginning of a civil proceeding that often swallows weeks in pride. Nathan Pike rides for town with Ezekiel and Abram close behind, each eager to convert confusion into law. On August 15, 1839, in the Baldwin County Courthouse second-floor chancery room, an examining magistrate receives 3 objects: the ledger page with shifted clock terms, the sheriff's log entries moonlean and lantern sweep at ferry, and the original bond note that now sits like a small fire in the clerk's tray. The room smells of beeswax and inkstone. A jury of view is summoned not to try a person but to look upon papers and a place. Procedure runs as procedure runs. The sheriff reads his log aloud, lines that sound like order. Present at Moonleen, no craft seen, storehouse inspected, lock compromised. Ezekiel insists upon the ledger's authority. Its sun-high entry makes him feel timed and owed. Abram tries to distinguish between ledger and bond, as if one were commerce and the other an unfortunate game that he now regrets. The magistrate, whose work usually concerns fences and estates, asks only whether the bond indenturing Thomas Crowell, a minor, to an unsecured creditor, is lawful under the county's practice. It is not. Even here, where paper owns bodies, there are lines that embarrass a court when read aloud. So the courthouse does what courthouses do when embarrassed. It seizes a matter to itself. An order goes to Nathan Pike to attach the ledger for inspection, to secure the mill pending resolution of a minor's indenture, and to post a watch at Ferry Landing to prevent further irregular passage. Now, the mill is no longer simply a workplace. It is a subject of court. The same day, a notice is carried to the local press, a small column in the Milledgeville paper, describing an unfortunate confusion of times and securities at Hickory Shoals, and promising that proper custody of records will be maintained. No names of the enslaved appear. They rarely do. But a county learns where to stare by reading where a clerk points. The county now faces two clocks. One is the courthouses, with rooms, orders, and seals. The other is the rivers, with shoals, cut banks, and cane. While Nathan hangs the court's notice at Ferry Landing and positions a watchman whose boots scrape loud enough to reassure his own ears, the people already moved to the far bank have drifted downstream by night stages. Ruel, sling tight, guides 3 at a time along the cut bank trail the ferryman showed in winter, then inland through switchgrass to a cypress bottom, where water stands black and ankle-deep even in August. There, an old turpentine camp holds a roof, a hearthstone, and a length of rusted butcher's hooks that become a rail for drying shoes. They eat what can be eaten cold. They sleep in turns. They unlearn the habit of bells. On August 18th, a posse sweeps the shoals with long poles and finds nothing but a shirt rag snagged on cane. Silas tries the storehouse door again for the sound of compliance and finds only the memory of control in his palm. On August 19th, Abram receives the court's attachment. The ledger must remain in town for 30 days. Without it, the mill cannot sell grain to larger buyers. Bills cannot be reconciled beyond the horizon of handshakes. He rides home cursing paper in private and praising paper in public. As for Isaiah Gant, there is no arrest. There is no name said in court. There is only a rumor passed along wash lines and at camp meetings of a man who felt the wheel with one hand and the rope with the other and taught a yard to smell like supper. In late September, a ferryman on a tributary swears he saw a quiet skiff cross at blue hour with 4 shapes low in it and a 5th along the rope above like a shadow. He writes nothing down. Some acts do not want a clerk. A few from the 24 are taken back by patrols. 2 young men at a woodline when a horse snorted and they moved too fast. 1 elder who chose to return because her daughter stayed hidden in plain sight at the main house. But most of the first wave, the woman with the sheets, the boy who fed the hounds, Ruel with his stiff shoulder, disappear into bottomland maroon camps where cypress and myrtle hold sound close. In winter, somebody trades fig cuttings for salt in a hamlet 2 counties away, and a needle changes hands with the cutting, passed like a charm. The county answers the embarrassment of a child indentured on a bond with policy. By October, a circular from the justices of the inferior court recommends that all ledgers counting human labor be kept under lock not in mill offices but in sheriff's rooms overnight to prevent alterations or accidents. A notice to storehouse keepers suggests replacing old rusted locks with new patterns and auditing key rings quarterly, a ritual that swells Silas with temporary relevance. A kennel ordinance quietly forbids feeding hounds away from designated posts, which turns port shade into law. At Ferry Landing, the rope is taken down for 5 days for inspection and then put back with new knots no one asked the river to bless. The press pretends distance. For 3 weeks, small items speak of the integrity of records and the sadness of family matters before the court. No paper names the boy, Thomas Crowell, whose handprint in flour dust once lived beside a dice cup. But boys in town hear and repeat a rhyme about a bell that counted wrong and made dogs dine at dawn. The rhyme annoys fathers and delights children. It survives long after orders expire. Ezekiel Dodd retreats from loud dice to quiet notes, trading his brass cup for a ledger strap. He visits the mill less often. When he does, he covers the book when he sneezes. Abram sells a fraction of his interest in Hickory Shoals to a cousin to raise cash while the ledger sits in town. He keeps his voice even and his hand steady when he signs, but his thumb prints a faint grease crescent on the deed that a clerk smiles at and then files. Nathan Pike reads his log to himself after supper for several nights, as if repetition could make time line up. He locks the sheriff's room door and pockets a new key that actually turns a new lock. He feeds the hounds exactly where an ordinance tells him and leaves the wheelhouse alone. The story does not become a trial. It becomes an arrangement. The ledger returns after 30 days with a paper sleeve and a red wax dollop over a cotton thread. It now bears a fresh notation in clerk's hand about the regrettable confusion of terms on August 15th. The sheriff's log holds 3 lines that sound confident and hide doubt. The bond that traded Thomas remains an exhibit in a file that law students will later describe as a curiosity in Georgia practice, a moment when even a county court blushed. Among the people who worked the wheel and slept in quarters row, a narrow song takes shape. No names, only places and motions. It mentions the fig tree and the pebbles, the needle that shines only when you move, the rope that sings underhand, the bell that rang itself and made men run the wrong way. Women hum it while scrubbing washboards at Ferry Landing and let the tune drift to Cain where ears that need it catch it. Children know the count in the song, once, twice, and clap hands when the bell in the rhyme rings. When winter comes and the river's skin tightens, a ferryman finds a reed strip snagged in drift near Hickory Shoals, knotted, then unknotted, then knotted again. He leaves it hanging in a nail on the back post of his shed, not as a superstition exactly, but as a reminder that water and paper both remember touch. Years later, when a graduate researcher on June 21, 2023 set the bond note and the sheriff's log side by side in a chilled room, a few grains of flour dust shook loose from the old paper and settled on the table like morning fog. Under that pale powder, the dice cup's faint rim bruise still made its false seal. Outside the archive, a church bell across a parking lot tested its pre-dawn hammer and rang once, then twice, to tune itself for a weekend service. The objects had not changed, ledger, keys, rope, bond, but their uses had. A county that once locked people with paper had once been turned by paper into looking away at the only hours that mattered. The echo that endured was not a verdict. It was a song that kept time with a bell, teaching other hands how to read a yard, how to ride a rope, how to make procedure walk in a circle while the river carried bodies forward. In the mind's eye, the upper yard stands quiet. The tally board holds a chalk correction that time has dried. The fig tree drops a late fruit onto packed earth and asks nothing. And in the emptied office, a soft coat of flour dust settles over the ledger again, painting a handprint that is not a boy's and not an owner's, only the world's, open and flat, waiting for someone to turn the page.